Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Debbie from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. I have Min with me today. Hello Min.
Hello all, hello.
And what are we talking about today, Min?
We're just briefly touching on the Sydney market, just very briefly, not a big topic. Well, it's a big topic, but not a big episode today. Just a really brief little chat, because I actually went to Sydney for about 7 days last week before the Easter break, covering the Easter break period there. So it was nice to go around, look at the sights and sounds, meet some people relevant in SDA, providers as well. Be nice to talk about what I saw, yeah.
Yeah, so I think as to start this discussion off, probably should review where we are in the SDA market in Sydney.
Yeah. Tell me, how do you feel about the SDA world in Sydney?
Still a massive undersupply. Main reason, of course, being the cost of property.
Land's more so, right?
Yeah. But
then also, we've come across other providers and builders saying how difficult and challenging it is to work with councils, be it regional or metro councils.
New South Wales is just really difficult.
And we're talking about 7-star efficiencies, council requirements for Class 3 and or lifts within double-storey houses and whatnot. So it is challenging in the New South Wales market, yeah.
Very.
We call it red tape.
So, it is still the most undersupplied part of Australia by a long, long way. We're now getting a lot of, and we'll be discussing this now, quite a lot of apartment stock, but it doesn't solve completely the need from a lot of providers for housing stock, especially for robust, and the fact that not all participants want to live in apartments.
But a lot do.
Absolutely, which leads us into really this discussion.
I want to rephrase my comment just then. Maybe not a lot do, but a lot want to live independently.
Yeah.
Which means sort of villa or an apartment. So that's what I mean.
Yeah. So, Min, tell us about your trip to Sydney. What did you do? Where did you go?
Well, the relevant areas that are relevant to my discussion today, very briefly, really are old locations we've talked about in the past few years, being Maryland, St. Mary's, Schofields, Liverpool. But more so, new areas that we have never explored but are now very keen on collaborating with is places like Rockdale, Enfield, Blakehurst, Botany. Debbie, you're a Sydney gal. Tell me more about these areas which, people like us in Brisbane don't really know much about Sydney geographics.
Well, those 4 locations you just mentioned are all either in the inner southwest or southern parts, down past the airport, past Mascot, really old established suburbs.
Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention one other suburb, Castle Hill as well.
That's in a completely different part of Sydney, but those first 4 are down in the south and the southwest. Castle Hill is in the, when I was living in Sydney, where I grew up in Sydney, Castle Hill was out in the northwestern sticks, but these days it's actually not that far out, given the size of Sydney now. So it's in a really good mid-outer northwest location, sort of, you could say it's kind of north of Parramatta, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So do you like these areas?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Tightly held suburbs, locations with, I assume, minimal supply of SDA being built in those areas. And I think we're fortunate to have, these organisations who are working with these developers come to us to say, hey, we have adaptable units here. Let's talk about modifying them to be HBS, FA or IL if possible. So Debbie, yesterday we were sitting in the boardroom here in Brisbane with George, one of the acquisitions managers from this developer, and also Jeremy Soden, one of the assessors we've worked with in the past few years, How do you think that meeting went in our discussion about Rockdale as a one example scenario here?
Oh, look, it went really well. It was interesting because George really knows nothing about SDA, doesn't understand the requirements.
And that's no insult to him. He's a developer.
No, of course not. Not remotely, George. Very understandable that you don't understand it, but you do understand what adaptable is, and you understand about wheelchair-friendly type apartments.
So for the purpose of our listeners, what does adaptable mean, please?
I guess it's beyond the livable housing standards, which was sort of a term bandied about a lot a few years ago. The original SDA guidelines were sort of based upon those livable housing standards, but it's now well and surely been superseded. But the adaptable properties are basically built wheelchair accessible and able to be adapted for somebody who needs a high level of accessibility. However, they're not remotely anywhere near SDA standard.
Now, Jeremy said to us, in our office here, said that a HPS front door entrance would normally be 10-20 millimeters
Minimum.
required. The one in Rockdale is almost, 6 months from completion is only 850 millimeters.
Which works for IL, but not for wheelchair, FA or HP.
So in theory, we could look at modifying stuff inside the apartment to make it maybe FA, but because the structure of the door entry has already been fixed and set, it cannot be modified. When the HPS FA is out of the question, but IL is very, very, very highly likely to be converted over to an IL standard, yes.
Yeah, the main changes needed really would be the bathroom and obviously the IL requirements of things like luminous contrasts and the positioning of the hardware, the door hardware and light fittings, etc. And maybe the access to the external private balcony.
Yeah. So these ones here are probably completing in about next 6 months, 7 months, November 25 this year. So we've jumped in right in the early stages where after having seen the property myself at Rockdale, it should be okay for IL once Jeremy, the assessor, confirms with the developer that we can make some small changes there and reprice properly for these five one-bedroom IL possible.
I think there's 4 one-bedroom and 1 2-bedroom.
And 1 2-bedroom. So the one bedder probably would be high 7s and the other one being mid 9s for the 2-bedder IL.
So, they're quite good prices for Rockdale, I would say.
In a building of about 50-ish
Yeah.
apartments, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see developers being open-minded to allow for such adaptable apartments in the early stages of construction.
And I believe now that in these complexes, certainly in New South Wales, they do need to, it's mandatory that they have allowances for some level of adaptability in certain number of apartments. So that does make it easier, especially if you get in early enough that, like, we're a bit late with the Rockdale development, but if it still hasn't even gone to construction yet, there is much more likelihood of it being able to be made wheelchair friendly, i.e. high physical support.
Now, this same developer tells us that they just started construction on another site in Blakehurst, and Blakehurst is a lovely place. I think about 200-300 meters from the water.
Yeah, it's down on the St. George's River.
Very nice, yeah. And their possibly will be adaptables being converted into HPS, 5 or 6 of them with 1 hour away as well. That's a great opportunity there for us to join as well, yeah. And lastly, Botany, Debbie. Where's Botany?
Botany's just near, Botany Bay Airport, Mascot.
So their construction starting next month, and we're looking at working with the assessor to redesign it with the architect.
Again, to make HPS.
HPS, yeah. So those will be probably a year and a half because they're small projects, But yeah, we're really grateful to be able to get in at this early stage of pre-construction to get them slightly modified to allow for HPS for these adaptable apartments across these other 2 ones there.
And we are only talking about a handful in each location. So, and we know that the demand is going to be amazing there. So I think they will be a really good opportunity for both tenants, participants, and any potential investors.
And then also, Debbie, I had a nice big one-day meeting with some vendors who owned a lot of apartments in Castle Hill. We're talking about 30 to 50 potential IL apartments, 1-bedrooms converted into IL compliant.
So they're already built and actually tenanted,
yeah,
these apartments, aren't they? Some of them anyway.
So they actually had the engineer, the builder, and the team there out there discussing the potential conversion to IL compliant apartments. And it's looking like very, very
likely,
subject to changing the kitchen, changing the bathroom and whatnot to be fully compliant. So it's, again, watch this space. We might come back to you next month or so with potential opportunities for investors to jump into.
Yeah, that'll be a really good opportunity.
It will be about the $690,000 to $720,000 price range between two different sites in Castle Hill. And Castle Hill, by the way, is right next to, adjacent to the shopping centre and above the train station as well.
That reminds me of the Marylands development. We still have some apartments for sale, and you wanted to just touch on those.
Yeah, there's about 10 left there of the one. They're still for sale. They're empty, but they're filling up slowly.
They are filling up, yeah.
And what we're seeing is the vendor was actually repricing the price. Which is a participant goes in, they're going to reprice it up to a higher price.
So get in before they're tenanted, basically.
So, if you do buy one that's actually built and filled up, you're paying a premium price for that because it's worth more with the income coming in straight away.
Yeah. But that's, again, reiterate, that is such a good site. It's a premium product right opposite a big Stocklands shopping mall, right at the train station, right at the bus station. These developments just tick all the boxes.
I want to say to our listeners here, if you've been watching our journey on this podcast channel for the last 3 years, you know that we've been talking about apartments for at least 2 years. We're one of the most vocal people out there in the last 3 years in Australia, in the SDA world, talking about apartments. Now, I know the old school thinking is, the values in the land, blah, blah, blah. I know that. We've all heard that since before. However, Debbie, let's go through a quick little 1-minute summary here. If you were to go do an SDA house in Sydney, an average suburb in Sydney, what's the cost and what's the process and what's the time? You tell me how to do this. You tell me. 2.5 million? Start from scratch. You got to find a place first.
Yeah. Even if you found a really
an old house,
rundown house to do a knockdown rebuild.
1.4 million.
Yeah. That's to start with, just to buy the land.
They've got to knock the house down.
Yeah.
Apply it for demolition approval, and then development approval, and then BA approval, permits, and then construction. I mean, the cost to build a house in Sydney is going to be, Joe, one of the builders we know, he said $8-9 per square metre there, So, a 220 square metre house at $8,000. $1
million build.
It's a lot. So your 1.4 million old house knocked down and the
becomes 2.5 million.
And Debbie, what's the location factor look like for these average suburbs? Location factor and SDA income and tenancy?
Look, it might be a little bit. We know there are some areas in Sydney that have a crazy high location factor, but those are also the crazy expensive suburbs, like the eastern suburbs and the inner west, the northern beaches, the North Shore. And you're not going to buy an old property in any of those areas for under 1.5 million. You're going to be looking at probably 3 million start price. So the location factor in these other areas is maybe marginally higher than the median one. So yeah, you'll get a little bit more income, but it's not necessarily going to make it viable. And that's why we are seeing such an undersupply of housing and villas in Sydney.
I think given the fact that so many people have from Sydney, Melbourne invested in the cheaper regional locations around Australia, being North Queensland, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, Tasmania.
And Melbourne.
They're now probably regretting going to those areas because there was so much saturation of investors following them. And now the smart investors now looking at high demand, low supply areas, which is the biggest lesson to be learned here from all the last 5 years of SDA. And being realistic now. I think the investors now being realistic with, hey, I should be happy with a $850, $90 purchase with a tenant with 70 to 90 grand income with a 9 to 10% circa income result, net income. That people are now realizing that is probably more realistic because the last few years, Debbie, wouldn't you agree? It's been so unrealistic, the expectations of investors the last few years. Yeah.
100%.
So I guess overall, the purpose of this podcast is to reach out to everyone out there who is in the Sydney market, who's looking at developing or building, or providers as well, who want to collaborate with us. We're happy to talk to, advise, suggest, and refer you on to other collaborators in the NDIS world, SDA world, in the Sydney market. Because we're now spending a lot of time in Sydney as well ourselves. And our podcast show, we talked a lot about Melbourne the last 3 years. Now we're spending a lot of time and effort in Sydney as well. So the two favourite for us is Melbourne and Sydney for sure, metro, given the fact that there's supply, saturation, lending restrictions and challenges and all that kind of stuff, which you're all aware of. But we're very keen and comfortable with Sydney overall, right, Demi?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we're dealing with a lot of good providers down there as well who have tenants. So the demand is not going anywhere anytime soon in Sydney. And the situation that we're aware of in Victoria and Melbourne with the government housing, all the group homes are going to be defunded at the end of this year. We know that something similar is going to happen in New South Wales. There's so much of the current stock in the SDA system is old, existing, non-SDA compliant properties. And participants are still living in these not fit for purpose, inferior, bad housing. So I think that the demand in Sydney is going to be going on for quite a long time before it's met.
Debbie, can I give you a task to come back to us, our listeners, one day with? We know the whole Vic Homes legacy group home story in Victoria. We know that. But what's the equivalent in New South Wales, Sydney? Do you know what the numbers
No,
are?
I don't know. I mean, obviously there are legacy homes everywhere. They will be defunded. I was able to determine the dates of defunding in Victoria. I think I might be able to find similar information for New South Wales. So basically when the NDIS actually was implemented in each region in Australia, the 10 years for the defunding of legacy properties kicked off at that point. And that's different dates for all the different regions, not just states, but we refer to them as jurisdictions. So within New South Wales, most of those 10 years are going to be up within the next 2 years, I think, 2027. But that's only the legacy properties. Those are the 6+ resident group homes, the 4 and 5 resident group homes, and even the smaller houses that are for less than 4 residents that are still part of the existing cohort. Those, again, they're not necessarily going to be fit for purpose. So there's a lot of those in Sydney, a huge number.
Sure. Debbie, in the next few weeks, can we do a follow-up to this podcast about Sydney on the topic of legacy group homes that you're talking about that we need to look into, number one? And number two, today being the 24th of April, we've just published the episode on our podcast show called the SDA Shrinking Undersupply topic. Again, back to Sydney and New South Wales, I'd like to bring that topic there back to the group homes legacy topic as well, as a follow-up to this episode today.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to go through those numbers again.
We will definitely address that.
Because, I think we'll be spending more time in the coming few months going to Sydney and covering Sydney as a topic in our podcast show, because it does deserve the time, because the last 3 years, we haven't spent much time talking about Sydney overall on the podcast or on our website or on our stock being promoted to.
And we've had a few projects in the past.
But they were really us dipping our foot in the water. But now it's really evident to us the massive demand. We're working with various different steel providers and SDA providers for Sydney. We're now seeing more developers coming to us, both passive investors and also active investors who want us to get involved with the advice, the assessment, the viability, of rolling out SDA product in their complex self-apartments and products out there. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Min.
Cool. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, we'll talk to you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and just share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.